The wind had teeth that night, sharp as the memories that hunted her. Snow spun in silver swirls beneath a moon as pale as a dying flame. Evelyn Grant stumbled to the forest, clutching her torn shawl around her shoulders, her boots sinking into drifts that reached her knees. Each breath scraped her lungs raw. Each step felt like it might be her last. The world had gone quiet except for the whisper of the pines and the low growl of something moving out there in the dark. She didn't remember how long she had been walking. Hours, maybe days. Time had blurred since they left her, or rather, since they'd cast her out. She could still hear the echo of her husband's mother, sharp and cruel. A woman who can't bear children has no place under my roof. No place in this family. The words bit deeper than frost. Evelyn pressed her hand to her belly, empty, barren, useless, as they called it, and tried not to scream. Her fingers brushed against the silver locket that hung from her neck. Its hinge cracked, the tiny portrait inside long faded. She'd worn it since her stillbirth 2 winters ago. The child that never drew breath. Her punishment for that loss, it seemed, was exile. The snow thickened, turning the forest into a white blur. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, long, mournful, almost human. Evelyn stopped, her pulse hammering. The sound seemed to circle her, echoing from every direction. She turned, her skirt snagging on a low branch. She yanked free and stumbled forward again, praying for light, for shelter, for anything that wasn't this endless cold. The year was 1872, and Mercy was a stranger in the mountains. A gust tore through the trees, nearly knocking her from her feet. She caught herself on a trunk, the bark biting into her palms. Her breath rose in quick clouds. Then she saw it, a flicker in the distance. Firelight? Her heart leapt, then sank just as quickly. Firelight could mean warmth, or it could mean men. Still, she couldn't stop. She moved toward it, half crawling, half staggering, until she reached a clearing. But there was no fire, only the reflection of moonlight off frozen water. A creek, wide and black, its surface rimmed with ice. She stared at it, trembling. She couldn't go on much farther. Her knees buckled. She fell to the ground, the cold biting through her dress. The locket slipped from her grasp, clinking softly against a rock. For a long moment she just lay there, snow gathering on her hair like a burial shroud. Then the forest whispered behind her. She turned slowly. Between the trees, something moved. Not an animal, not quite. A shadow smaller than a man, crouched low, watching her. Evelyn's heart froze. She pushed herself up, grabbed a branch from the ground, and held it like a weapon. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked in the stillness. The shadow didn't answer. It crept closer, quiet as snowfall. Then another shape appeared beside it, smaller still. And another, for in total, the first stepped into the moonlight. A boy, maybe 10 years old, his hair a wild tangle beneath a fur cap too big for him. His coat was patched, his boots mismatched. His face, thin and dirty, carried a kind of defiance that looked too old for his years. Behind him came 3 more children, a girl with tangled red hair, a boy with a limp, and a little one no older than 6, clutching a rag doll whose stuffing leaked out the side. They were a ragged army of ghosts. Evelyn lowered her branch slowly. "What were you doing out here?" The eldest boy tilted his head, eyes narrow. "We could ask you the same, ma'am." His voice was cautious, but not afraid. The others huddled close behind him, eyes wide, hands trembling from the cold. Evelyn began, but the words wouldn't come. How did one explain that their family had abandoned them to die? That the world had deemed them useless? "I'm lost," she managed. "Been walking for days. I need shelter." The boy studied her a moment longer. Then he said, "You got any food?" Evelyn shook her head. "No." "Then you best come quick," he muttered, jerking his chin toward the trees. "Before the wolves do." She hesitated only a second before following. Her legs barely held her as she trudged behind them through the snow. The forest closed around them like a secret. They moved in silence, the boy leading, the little girl's hand in his. Evelyn could hear the soft crunch of their steps, the distant creak of frozen branches. After what felt like an eternity, They reached a small cabin nestled between two great pines. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney. The walls were rough-hewn, patched with bark and mud, but it stood firm against the wind. The children slipped inside through a crooked door, and Evelyn followed, shivering violently. The warmth hit her like a blow. Inside, the cabin was dim, lit by a single oil lamp. The smell of wood smoke, wet fur, and something cooking filled the air. There were no adults, only makeshift bunks and a fire burning low in a stone hearth. The boy pointed to a stool. "Sit. You look like you'll drop." Evelyn sank onto it, her teeth chattering. The youngest girl offered her a tin cup of warm water. Evelyn's hands shook as she took it. "Thank you, sweetheart." The boy crossed his arms. "Name's Tommy," he said. "That's Will. That's Jenny, and the little one's Lila." Evelyn nodded weakly. "I'm Evelyn." Tommy eyed her locket. "You from the town?" She hesitated. "I was. Where's your people?" She looked into the fire. The flames danced in her eyes like memories she wished she could burn away. Gone. For a long moment, there was only the sound of crackling fire. Then the red-haired girl, Jenny, piped up, "We thought you was a ghost." Evelyn almost smiled. "Sometimes I feel like one." Tommy frowned. "You hurt bad." "Only cold. And tired." "You can sleep there," he said, nodding toward a pile of blankets near the fire. "But we don't got much food. Pa used to say we share what we have. But Pa's been gone a while." Evelyn's eyes softened. "Gone where?" The boy didn't answer. He just turned away and stirred the fire with a stick. That silence told her more than any words could. They ate a thin stew that night, bits of rabbit and roots, and Evelyn felt the ache in her bones ease for the first time in days. The children talked quietly, their voices weaving stories of the forest. The logging men who came in the spring, the traps they'd learned to set, the wolves that stole from them when the moon was full. It was a world built from fear and survival, and yet they spoke of it like it was home. Later, when the others had fallen asleep, Evelyn sat awake watching the fire die down. Tommy was still up, sitting near the door, an old rifle across his knees. "You shouldn't stay up all night," she said softly. "Somebody's out to watch for wolves," he replied. She studied his thin shoulders, the way he tried to look strong. "You're too young for that burden." He shrugged. "Ain't nobody else to do it." Evelyn's throat tightened. She remembered another boy, her own child, never born, and wondered if he'd have had eyes like Tommy's. "How long have you been on your own?" "Since the thaw last spring," he said. "Pa!" He was a logger. "A tree crushed him down by Frost Hollow Creek. We buried him ourselves. Ma died the winter before. Fever." "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Don't be. We get by. You're strong children." "Strong don't feed us," he muttered, turning away. Evelyn said nothing more. She watched him until his eyelids drooped and the rifle slid from his grip. When he finally slept, she rose quietly, placed another log on the fire, and pulled the blankets over the little ones. The next morning, pale light filtered through the cracks in the cabin wall. Evelyn woke to the sound of laughter, a sound she hadn't heard in what felt like years. The children were outside, playing in the snow, their breath making tiny clouds in the air. She stepped to the doorway, watching as Lila tried to catch flakes on her tongue, giggling. Tommy was chopping wood with an axe that looked nearly as heavy as he was. Evelyn went to him. "Let me?" He shook his head. "You ain't healed yet." "I've chopped wood since I could walk," she said, taking the axe before he could stop her. She set a log on the block, swung, and split it clean in two. The sound echoed through the trees. Tommy blinked, then grinned for the first time. "All right," he said. "Maybe you stay." That night they ate better. A squirrel Tommy trapped, and the roots Evelyn had dug. The fire burned brighter. The walls seemed less thin. Evelyn found herself telling them stories. Of life back at the ranch, of the wild horses that ran free near the ridge, of how the stars seemed closer out there. The children listened wide-eyed, their faces lit by the flickering glow. But when the laughter died down and sleep came again, Evelyn lay awake once more. She thought of Caleb, her husband, and the way he hadn't looked back when they left her in the woods. She remembered the sound of the wagon wheels crunching over snow, the silence that followed, and the realization that she was truly alone. Only now she wasn't. In these children, lost, ragged, and braver than most men, she felt something stirring inside her, something she thought she'd buried with her unborn child. She had no claim to them, no blood tie, but they'd saved her life, and perhaps in some strange way, she could save theirs. As the firelight flickered across their sleeping faces, Evelyn whispered a quiet promise into the dark. "No one will leave you," she said, "not while I still draw breath." Outside, the wind began to howl again, but the cabin stood firm. Snow pressed against the windows, and the pines moaned with the weight of it, yet inside there was warmth, fragile but real. When Evelyn finally drifted asleep, she dreamed of her small hands pulling her from the snow, of laughter echoing through the forest, and of a voice, her own, whispering back to the storm, "I am not finished yet." By morning, the world outside was buried in white. The forest stretched endless and silent, but the cabin smoked steady, defiant against the cold. Evelyn stepped outside, the frost biting her cheeks, the air clean and sharp. She looked at the children playing in the snow and smiled faintly. She had been left in the forest to die, and instead she had been found. What she didn't know yet was that the forest wasn't done testing her, and the ghosts of her past, like the wolves that howled beyond the trees, were already drawing near. But for now, there was only breath and fire, and the fragile beginning of something like hope. The thaw came late that year, slow and stubborn as an old mule. Snow melted into gray mud, and the pines dripped like rain. The cabin at Frost Hollow breathed smoke into the cold air, a lonely pillar against the dark stretch of forest. Evelyn Grant woke before dawn each morning, feeding the fire, warming a pot of thin porridge, and checking the traps Tommy had set by the creek. The days had fallen into rhythm, small chores, smaller victories. Yet each night when the wind moaned across the ridge, she felt the world beyond the trees pressing closer. The children had grown stronger since the night they'd found her half frozen in the snow. Their faces had color again. Lila laughed often now, chasing Jenny through the pines with a stick like a sword. Will's limp had improved, and he'd taken to carving little animals from pine bark. Tommy was harder to read. He was all watchful silence and sudden bursts of work, always keeping his eyes on the tree line. Evelyn saw herself in that quiet vigilance, the way one carried pain by pretending not to feel it. It was on a morning in late March that she found him mending the snare line, his breath curling like smoke. "You've set these well," she said, crouching beside him. "Your father must have taught you." He nodded once. "Pa said traps are patience. The woods'll feed you if you respect 'em." He sounded like a wise man. Tommy didn't look up. He was, till men took him. Evelyn's fingers paused over the wire. "Man," he hesitated, jaw tight, "from the logging camp south of here. Claimed our land weren't ours. Pa stood his ground. They said he was stealing their timber." His voice dropped. "Next morning, we found him by the creek, axe still in his hand." Evelyn's stomach turned. She pictured it. The cold water, the blood mixing with melt, the small hands digging a grave. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Tommy shrugged like it didn't matter, but his shoulders trembled. "Ain't your fault. They said they'd come back someday. Said the forest don't belong to no one but them." She placed a hand on his arm. "Then they'll have to come through me first." He looked at her uncertain, as if weighing whether she meant it. "You ain't got to stay here, Miss Evelyn. You could go back to town. You ain't like us." "I was left for dead," she said softly. "That makes me exactly like you." He said nothing, but his grip on the wire tightened until his knuckles turned white. That night, she told the children stories by the fire, stories of courage, of outlaws who turned righteous, of women who tamed wild land with nothing but will. Lila's eyes shone as she leaned against Evelyn's shoulder. "You sound like you knew them," the girl said. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." Outside, snow began to fall again, lazy and light. She thought of Caleb then, her husband, and the hollow in her chest where love used to live. He'd wanted children, a legacy to bear his name. When her body failed her, his affection turned cold as stone. In the end, he'd agreed to her mother-in-law's cruel plan, Drive Evelyn into the wilderness under pretense of helping her find God's will. It wasn't God she found out there. It was this. Smoke, laughter, and 4 hungry children who'd given her something closer to faith than she'd ever known. Days stretched into weeks. The forest stirred with new life. Rivers ran fierce with meltwater, and the wind carried the scent of pine sap and wet earth. Evelyn began to feel a fragile peace. She mended torn clothes, taught the children their letters using soot and scraps of bark. Will would sit with his carved animals while she traced words in the dirt. Bear Creek, home. Home. She hadn't said that word aloud in months. But peace in that country never lasted long. It began with the sound of gunfire. Evelyn was hanging laundry behind the cabin when the sharp crack split the morning air. One, then another. She froze, the sheet twisting in her hands. Tommy was already at the door, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Stay here," he said. "Like hell," she replied, grabbing the axe by the chopping block. Together they followed the sound to the trees, their boots crunching over thawing ground. They stopped at the ridge overlooking the frozen creek. Smoke curled in the distance, not from their fire. Men's voices carried on the wind. 2 riders appeared on the far bank, rifles across their saddles, laughing as they fired at stumps in the water. Evelyn's blood ran cold. "They're just fooling around," Tommy whispered. "No," she said, watching her movements. "They're scouting." One of the men pointed toward the hill, toward their cabin. Evelyn ducked low. "They can't know," Tommy said, panic flickering behind his bravado. "Maybe not yet, but they will." They crept back through the trees, silent and swift. When they reached the cabin, Evelyn gathered the children close. "You're going to listen to me," she said. "If men come here asking questions, you say nothing. You hide. Do you understand?" Jenny's lip trembled. "Are they bad men?" "The worst kind," Evelyn said. "The kind who think the world's theirs to take." That night, she couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin made her reach for the axe. The forest outside seemed alive with whispers, branches cracking, an owl's cry cutting through the dark. She sat by the fire, staring into the flames, seeing faces in the smoke. Caleb Sneer, her mother-in-law's cold eyes. When dawn came, she found Tommy already outside, checking the trail. His boots were soaked through, his hair damp with dew. "They went east," he said, toward the logging road. Evelyn studied the footprints in the mud, deep, deliberate, like they wanted to be found. "They'll come back," she murmured. "Then what do we do?" She looked up at the mountain ridge beyond the creek. "We get ready." The next few days passed in tense rhythm. Evelyn taught the children how to hide their tracks, how to move quietly, how to pack what they needed in case they had to flee. They gathered dried meat and stored it in sacks by the door. She reinforced the shutters with timber, patched holes in the roof, and oiled the hinges on the rifle Tommy carried. Lila asked, "Why are we doing all this, Miss Evelyn?" Evelyn knelt to her level, brushing hair from her eyes. "Because sometimes the world forgets to be kind, sweetheart, and when it does, we have to remind it we're still here." One evening, while gathering firewood, Evelyn found herself staring at the creek again. The sun bled orange over the water, and she caught a reflection, pale, older than her years, but alive. She felt the weight of all she'd lost pressing against her ribs, but beneath it, something new pulsed. Purpose. That night, the storm rolled in. Wind tore the cabin roof, snow flurries twisting like ghosts outside the window. Evelyn kept the fire roaring while the children huddled together under blankets. Thunder cracked across the mountains, and the old boards creaked in protest. Then came the sound she feared most, the low rumble of horses. Tommy bolted upright. Evelyn motioned for silence. The hoofbeats grew louder, stopping just beyond the clearing. A man's voice shouted over the wind. "Cabin ahead. There's smoke. Check it." Evelyn's heart hammered. She motioned to the trapdoor beneath the table. "Go," she hissed. The children scurried inside, while pulling the hatch shut behind him. Evelyn grabbed the axe and pressed herself to the wall beside the door. The storm masked her breathing, but not the pounding of her heart. The door creaked open. A silhouette filled the frame, tall, wrapped in oilskin, rifle slung across his chest. Snow fell from his hat brim as he stepped inside, scanning the room. "Empty," he muttered. "Maybe squatters." Another voice from outside. "Look for food or signs of M. Boss says no one's supposed to be out this far." Evelyn gripped the axe tighter. The man took another step forward, his boots leaving wet prints on the floor. He moved toward the hearth, crouching to touch the fire's edge. It was still warm. Before she could think, she swung. The axe blade bit into the doorframe inches from his head. He stumbled back, cursing. She leapt from the shadows, eyes wild. "Get out!" The man froze, his rifle halfway to his shoulder. "Easy, lady. I ain't looking for trouble." "Then you found the wrong forest," she spat. He raised his hand slowly. "Name's Price. Work for the Frost Timber Company. We ain't here to hurt nobody. Just clearing company land. This land isn't yours." He smirked. "Ain't yours neither." Her pulse thundered. "Leave." He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the back wall where the trapdoor lay hidden beneath a rug. Evelyn stepped forward, blocking his view. "Fine," he said finally, lowering his gun. "We'll be back tomorrow with papers. You can talk to the boss then." When he left, the snow swallowed the sound of their departure. Evelyn dropped the axe and fell to her knees, trembling. She lifted the hatch and pulled the children out. Lila clung to her neck, sobbing. "They'll come back," Tommy said grimly. "I know," Evelyn replied. "What do we do?" She stared into the dying fire, the embers glowing like old wounds. "We'll be ready." That night, she didn't sleep at all. The storm passed, leaving the world heavy with silence. The forest gleamed under a crust of ice. Evelyn sat by the window, watching dawn creep over the hills. Tommy joined her, setting down his rifle. "You ain't scared," he said quietly. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I've been scared every day since they left me in that forest. I just learned to walk with it." He looked out at the trees. "You think the men will really come back?" "Men like that always do." He nodded. "Then we'll fight." Her hand rested on his shoulder. "We will, but we'll fight smart." The day passed in quiet preparation. They gathered what supplies they could, buried the traps near the cabin's edge, and marked a path north toward a mountain trail, a last resort if they had to flee. Evelyn's shoulder ached with every swing of the axe, but she didn't stop. The children worked beside her, grim and determined. By evening, they had done all they could. The fire burned low, the rifle loaded, the door barred. Evelyn looked at each of their faces, weary, young, but strong. She realized then that they were no longer just children she had found. They were her family now, bound by something fiercer than blood. When the first howl echoed through the forest, she knew it wasn't wolves this time. It was men. Evelyn rose, her heart steady. "Inside," she whispered. The children obeyed without a word. Snow began to fall again, soft and relentless. Shadows moved between the trees, lanterns glinting like eyes. She tightened her grip on the axe, every muscle coiled. The forest around Frost Hollow held its breath. Somewhere out there, the past was coming for her, riding on hooves and hatred, and she meant to meet it head-on. In the silence before the storm broke, Evelyn Grant stood at the threshold of the cabin, her breath a cloud in the frozen air, and thought, "They left me to die once. They won't get the chance again." The dawn came slow and cold over the mountains, spreading its pale gold light across the clearing where Clara stood, her breath rising like smoke in the frigid air. The forest was quiet now, the kind of quiet that follows a night of reckoning. The small cabin she and the children had built from rough pine logs stood behind her, smoke curling gently from its chimney. But peace, she knew, was never permanent. Not in a world that took what it wanted and punished the weak for surviving. It had been weeks since the riders came through, men from her past, carrying the weight of her shame and the proof of her husband's cruelty. The memory burned in her mind. Her family's faces twisted in disgust, their words at the crack of a whip, barren, cursed, unwanted. They'd left her to die in that forest, her name no longer spoken. And yet she had lived, found by children who had no mother, and who now looked to her as though she were one. She turned from the trees, glancing toward the sound of laughter. Sam and Eli were chopping wood, their axes thudding rhythmically into the logs, while little Grace carried the kindling in her small arms, her cheeks flushed with effort. The oldest, Luke, stood watching near the edge of the clearing, eyes narrowed against the morning glare, his hand never far from the rifle slung across his shoulder. He'd learned that stance from his father, Clara knew. The memory of that man, hard and broken by loss, still lingered in the boy's every movement. "Breakfast near ready," Clara called out, her voice warm despite the ache in her chest. "Don't keep the fire waiting." Eli grinned, sweat shining on his brow. "You always say that like the fire'll eat it first." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe it will, if you take your time." They laughed, and for a moment it almost felt normal, like a real family. But deep down, Clara knew the forest never forgot. It had saved her, yes, but it also held her secrets. And secrets in the wilderness had a way of echoing until someone came to answer them. By mid-morning, the peace broke. Luke returned from patrol, his face pale and eyes sharp. "Riders," he said. "3 of 'em, heading this way." The laughter died. Clara's heart clenched. "You sure?" "Sure as the sunrise. They ain't locals either. Look mean, armed heavy." Clara felt the weight of dread settle in her stomach. There were only 2 kinds of men who rode through these woods now: trappers looking for trade or hunters looking for prey. She grabbed a rifle from the cabin wall and checked the chamber. The old iron was rough in her hands, but she'd learned to steady it over the past months. She'd had to. "Get the little ones inside," she said to Luke. "Bar the door. Keep the fire low." "What about you?" he asked. "I'll talk to them first." Luke hesitated, jaw tight, then nodded and disappeared into the cabin. Moments later, the sound of hooves broke through the trees. Clara stepped forward, heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. The riders emerged slowly. 3 figures on dust-covered horses, their faces hidden by hats and shadow. The man in the middle had a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. She knew that face. "Samuel Brackett," she breathed. Her brother. He dismounted, boots crunching on frost. "Didn't think I'd find you alive," he said, voice flat as stone. "Not after what Pa ordered. I wasn't planning on being found." He looked past her toward the cabin. "You've made quite the life out here. Heard rumors up north. A woman living with some orphans in the woods. Didn't want to believe it. But here you are." Clara's hands trembled on the rifle. "They're just children, Sam. Leave them be." "I didn't ride all this way for them," he said, taking a step closer. "I came for you. You shamed our name. Clara ran off, defied the family, and let Pa die thinking you'd cursed him." Her throat tightened. "I didn't curse anyone. I couldn't give him what he wanted. That's not the same as being cursed." Sam's expression hardened. He saw it different. "And so do I." The other men shifted behind him, rifles slung low. The air seemed to freeze between them. Clara knew what came next. This wasn't talk. This was a reckoning. "You got one chance to turn around," she said quietly. "Take your men and go." Sam smirked. "You gonna shoot your own kin?" "I already buried that kin once," she said. "Don't make me do it again." He raised his hand, and the world exploded into motion. The first shot rang out, splintering bark near Clara's head. She dropped to one knee, firing back. Her shot took the hat clean off one man's skull. The others dove for cover, returning fire. Bullets tore through branches, the forest alive with thunder. Inside the cabin, she heard the children scream. Clara darted behind a fallen log, reloading fast, every motion fueled by raw instinct. She'd been left for dead once. Never again. Sam's voice carried over chaos. "You can't win, Clara. You never could." She fired again. "Then maybe I'll die trying." The gunfire raged until smoke filled the air and the smell of powder burned her lungs. When the last echo faded, one of Sam's men lay still, another groaning beside his horse. Sam himself stood, clutching his bleeding arm, fury flashing in his eyes. "You made your choice," she said, rising slowly. "Now ride. Tell the rest of them I'm done running." He spat blood into the snow. You think this is over? You'll burn for what you did. Maybe I already have. He mounted his horse and turned away, vanishing through the trees, leaving the silence heavy and cruel. Clara's knees buckled. She lowered the rifle, hands trembling uncontrollably. The door of the cabin flew open, and Luke ran out, eyes wide. "Ma!" "Clara, you all right?" She nodded weakly. "I'm fine. It's over." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't. The forest still held danger, and Samuel Brackett would not let this go unanswered. Days passed. The wounds healed, but the fear lingered. The children stayed close, their laughter quieter now, their eyes flicking toward the tree-line, as if expecting ghosts. Clara kept watch each night, the rifle never far from reach. Sleep came in broken fragments, haunted by her brother's words. One evening, as the sun sank behind the pines, Luke sat beside her by the fire. "You could have run," he said softly. "Why'd you stay and fight?" Clara stared into the flames. "Because running never saved anyone. Not me, not you. This is the first place I've had something worth protecting." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll fight too, if they come back." She looked at him, the boy's face already hardening into that of a man. "I don't want that for you," she whispered. "But I reckon you don't get to choose what the world makes of you out here." The night grew deep. Wolves howled in the distance. Clara reached out, pulling the blanket around his shoulders. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we'll hunt. The traps need checking." "Good night, Ma," he murmured before the word even registered. Her heart twisted. She didn't correct him. Winter struck hard. Snow buried the world, and the cabin creaked under its weight. Food grew scarce, and the forest became both enemy and ally. They survived by will and by firelight. The bond between them forged stronger with each passing storm. But come spring, trouble returned, louder this time. Not 3 riders, but 6. She saw them through the trees before they saw her. And at their head, Samuel again, his arm in a sling, his rage undimmed. Luke crouched beside her behind a snowbank. "We can't fight that many." "No," she said quietly, "but we can make them pay for every step." She signaled to Eli and Sam, who waited near the ridge with rocks and slings. Grace was hidden under the cabin floor, her small hands clutching the dog for silence. The forest held its breath. The first man dismounted. Clara fired. The ambush erupted, shots, shouts, splinters flying. The forest turned to chaos. Eli hurled stones from above, knocking one rider clean from his horse. Luke's rifle barked twice, deadly and precise. But the attackers pressed forward, relentless. Then Samuel's voice roared through the din, enough hiding. "Face me." Clara stepped out, rifle raised. "You should have stayed gone." He smiled through the blood on his lip. "You should have stayed dead." They circled each other, the world narrowing to 2 souls bound by blood and betrayal. He fired first, missed. She dropped low, rolled, fired back. The bullet tore through his shoulder. He fell, clutching the wound, but still he crawled forward, hatred keeping him alive. "You think those kids will save you?" he rasped. "They'll grow up just like us. Hungry, angry, empty." Clara aimed, eyes cold. "Not if I have anything to say about it." He laughed, then lunged. They crashed into the snow, the rifle knocked away. His hands closed around her throat. She fought back, vision dimming, snow burning cold against her skin. But in the struggle, her fingers found the hunting knife at her belt. She drove it upward once, twice, until the grip around her neck loosened. Samuel slumped beside her, breath rattling once before fading into silence. The forest went still. Clara lay there long while the snow turning crimson beneath them. When she finally rose, she looked down at her brother's body, not with hate, but with a quiet, aching sorrow. "You could have come home," she whispered, "but I guess neither of us ever really had one." Luke and the boys emerged, faces pale but eyes alive. "It's over," Luke said. Clara nodded. "For now." They buried Samuel by the frozen river, marking the grave with a single pine branch. Then they returned to the cabin, where Grace waited, tears streaking her cheeks. Clara gathered them close by the hearth. the firelight washing over their tired faces. For the first time in her life, she felt something close to peace. Not because the danger was gone, but because she finally understood what home truly meant. Not blood, not name, but love fought for and won through pain. That night, as the wind howled beyond the cabin walls, Clara whispered a prayer, not for forgiveness, but for strength. The forest outside stretched endless and wild, full of secrets and ghosts. But inside there was warmth, laughter, life, and maybe that was enough. So when folks in town spoke years later of the woman who survived the wilderness and raised a family out of nothing, they called her the mother of the lost woods. Some said she was blessed. Others said she was cursed. But the truth lay somewhere in between. Because in the end, she hadn't just found her way back to life. She'd built one from the ashes. And if you listen close on a quiet night, you might still hear her voice through the pines, steady, strong, and full of fire, reminding anyone willing to listen that the wilderness doesn't take the weak. It makes them,